Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto What If Hub 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Ino Confesses to Naruto Chunin Exams Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Prologue. Gah, I can't believe I lost to Forehead. Now I have to do this. Three friends lay on the grass, buffeted by a cool evening breeze. One sat, his fingers idly ruminating through a bag of potato chips, before mechanically moving towards his mouth in a movement that had been so honed it was practically instinct. The other lay on his back, his eyes opened just enough to gaze into the clouds, but not enough for his pupils to be visibly seen. The last, a girl, paced around, her hair swinging in the wind, her footsteps trampling the grasses beneath her, and her gait one of inner turmoil. Come on. Don't just lay there. Give me some ideas. I can't do this without your help. The one staring at the skies closed his eyes even further, preventing his pupils from gathering any more light, as his breathing slowed on principle. He was kicked in the ribs for his effort. Don't pretend to fall asleep. His eyes opened, his speech coming out a slow, an enthusiastic drawl, like that of a donkey who had carried two obese men across the Suna Desert. Troublesome, you were the one who made the bed in the first place. The girl paused in her gait, one finger raised in indignation. That's because I thought I'd win. Forehead cheated. She got me with an uppercut that came out of nowhere. How was that cheating? Well, I don't know. All I know is, there's no way she could have beaten me in a fair fight. The boy eating the potato chips rubbed his cheek with his finger. His momentary reprieve from his favorite snack was provided with the need to be in the loop. He played the mediator amongst the trio, neither too hot-headed to listen to reason, nor too relaxed to abstain from taking actions. What was the bet about? The girl seemed to turn green at the memory. Her face soured as though she'd taken a bite out of an unripe, her fists clenched, balled and released and her body swayed in place, as though beseeched by seasickness. The loser has asked out, Naruto. The big-boned boy had his eyes widen, and the sleepy one merely muttered a simple word under his breath. Troublesome. I know. Just think. Asking out that loudmouthed, hyperactive, idiot in that horrible orange tracksuit. She shuddered in place. I can't be seen doing that. The girl plopped onto the grass, causing the pineapple-haired boy to stare, curiously, as his friend had not bothered about the grass stains, nor had she complained about ruining her dress nor whined about the possibilities of biting insects moving through the hardy green flora. Don't do it, Ino. The boy said, what do you stand to lose? It's either that or give up on Sasuke-kun, and leave him to Forehead. The boy said nothing, letting the atmosphere be filled with the comfortable sound of crackling potato chips. It echoed in the background constantly, like a symphony that could not be changed, and like an accompanying orchestra that reminded the boy of the companionship to which he was privileged. I know. Ino sprung to her feet, slamming her fist into her palm. I'll confess all sorts of feelings for Naruto, that way, he'll be the one to ask me out. The silent boy occupying himself with his chips spoke up, I don't think that's such a good idea, Ino. What do you mean, Choji? It's flawless. I don't think Shikamaru here could come up with a better plan. I mean, I still have to make him believe I like him. Don't lie to him, Shikamaru felt the need to say, he's observant. Ino felt her nose rumple in disbelief. Is he? She frowned, wondering if the Nara was joking. Since when? Since always. He paused, especially with things that catch his interest. Ino huffed, putting her hand on her waist. I'll be the judge of that. The pineapple-haired boy let out a single, slow nod. Don't say I didn't warn you. Within interest. Finding him was the hardest part. It was especially harder to track him down to a recluse location, one in which she knew Billboard Brow and a group of other girls would be watching from the bushes, probably ready to watch her make a fool of herself. She had hoped she'd be the one watching the pink-haired bimbo ask Naruto out. It would have been the most hilarious thing to watch as the blonde would have been so ecstatic, ignorant of the girl's own dismay. Naruto-kun. Huh, Ino. The blonde stared at her, looking both left and right as though uncertain. You talkin' to me? Ino felt her anger bubble up, but let it slide low. I don't think there's any other person named Naruto in Konoha, is there? The boy put his hands behind his head and let out an awkward laugh that almost made Ino cringe. Yeah, I'm the one and only Naruto Uzumaki Dadbao. Ino desperately wished the Shinigami would take her there and then. So, Naruto-kun, there's something I wanted to tell you. Huh, really? You see, Naruto-kun, I've been watching you for a while now, and I didn't want to tell you this, but I. The words formed in her mouth. As she stared at the inquisitive blue eyes of the shorter blonde, she found herself wondering why they would not come forth. Maybe it was something odd about how his eyes seemed to examine her, or how they lit up with an emotion she could not quite recognize, or perhaps, it was the giggling of the girls she could hear that made her uncertain of how to proceed. She didn't quite understand it herself. This was Naruto of all people. He bounced back from anything. So what if she was going to get his hopes up and lie to his face? She shouldn't care. It shouldn't matter to her. It's not like she was going to break his heart or anything, so why was she unable to find the right words to say? Hey Ino! The sudden exclamation threw her off guard, and she found him staring at her with a concentrated gaze she did not know he had possessed. Why yes. Go out on a date with me. To Ichiraku Ramen. The girl could not have been any more floored if the Hokage himself had pranced by on a unicycle. What? I know it's kinda sudden, but you're a really cool person, ya know. I mean, we've both got awesome blonde hair, though mine is way cooler, and I think you're pretty. She idly wondered if one of her clan members had taken over Naruto's body with the clan jutsu and made him say those words, but instead, she shook it off as the universe being in her favor on this odd particular occasion. Naruto had asked her out on a date, hence, she couldn't ask him out anymore, the bet was null and void. She was free. Ino regained a bit of her confidence, placing her hand on her hips. No way. Why in the world would I want to go out with you? I mean, wanting to date someone just because you think they're good looking. That's really shallow of you, Naruto. But, he paused. Isn't that the same reason why you like Sasuke-tem? What? No way. I like Sasuke-kun because he's strong and he's cool and he's. Words, fickle as they were, failed her. She had an extensive vocabulary of terms that focused on the mind, on plants, on animals, and yet, despite her collective accumulation of adjectives used to describe things which were beautiful, she remained speechless. Fine then, Naruto said, crossing his arms and turning around. Good luck with the tem, you two deserve each other. It was strange, as to how those words seemed to sting much more than she thought possible. It was not every day Yumino Iruka chose to treat Naruto out to dinner, and it was even rarer for him to offer to pay up the boy's backed-up debts, but, as he had found out from the resident gossip amongst the students, Naruto had asked out the young Yamanaka heiress and he had been brutally turned down. Though not exactly possessing sagely wisdom in the art of romance, the Chunin teacher felt that the young boy needed some company, or at the very least, needed some ramen to make him bounce back to his usual self. Which happened the very second the first bowl appeared. Oi, Tsuki Gigi, you out of toppings. My ramen's looking a little thin. Iruka bopped him over the head. Baka, don't be so ungrateful. To think I actually offered to treat you to ramen after the pranks you pulled in class last week. Naruto's lips turned into a semi-indignant pout. But the broth is like 10% smaller than it was yesterday. And the toppings and portions are smaller as well. Iruka's eyes twitched. I think it's just your appetite that's grown bigger. Haha. Naruto-kun is kind of right. Iruka's eyebrow rose. He is. I am. Tsuki nodded. Slowly. Our usual delivery boy is a little late with the order, so I had to cut corners for the ramen. I'm sorry about that. Iruka waved him off. It's nothing. I barely noticed the difference. Only a ramen-holic like Naruto would realize it. Ramen is the food of the gods and everything about it is divine, Dadbao. Naruto said, Grinning, I know everything there is to know about Ichiraku ramen. Uruka snorted. Sure, and I'm certain you can tell how many toppings are in my 14. Uruka blinked. He stared down at his bowl, and counted, and found himself baffled at the blonde getting the accurate number. Lucky guess. Naruto shook his head as he scarfed down more ramen. Not luck. Oh really? Then how many strands of noodles are left in my 38? Uruka stared into his bowl, slowly counting with his chopsticks, one by one, until he reached the exact number Naruto mentioned. How did you know that? Tsukijiji usually has a fixed number of strands per bowl. It's enough to leave you satisfied, but not too much that it'll make you leave it unfinished. He said between slurps, and, you eat really slow, Uruka-sensei. It was ridiculous to know the exact number of noodles in a bowl, and the speed required to actually consume said noodles, so Uruka found himself staring at Naruto, his mind trying to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Naruto, how many people have visited Ichiraku ramen today alone? Naruto took a huge slurp out of his bowl, 60 or so. Why? Uruka glanced to Tsuki and Ayame, and their widened eyes spoke more loudly than any verbal confirmation they could have possibly uttered. How did you know that? Ayame-ne's sleeves are folded up. What does that have to do with anything? Everything. Tsukijiji's sink is kind of deep. Ayame-ne doesn't really need to fold her sleeves all the way up to her elbow in order to wash the dishes. The only time she'd need to do that is when there are tons of dishes available and she's put them all in. She folds her sleeves so they don't fall into the filled sink and get wet, and also to make it easier for her to wash. Uruka's mouth felt dry. But that just tells you that they've been a lot of customers. How did you guess 50? Because Ayame-ne has also been cooking, Naruto said. Tsukijiji only ever lets Ayame-ne join him to prepare ramen when there are more customers than he can handle. And he's no slouch. He can take on 6 at a time, but if it gets too much, Ayame-ne helps him out. Naruto paused, placing a hand on his chin. Also, today's Monday, so there are usually about 8 or 11 customers in the morning, and around lunchtime, this place is filled really fast. That adds around 20 to 30 customers coming and going. Then after classes are over and in the evenings, there are fewer customers, but still enough to guess around 60. The sound of the kettle blowing was the only noise in the restaurant. How did you know Ayame-san had been cooking? What do you mean? She's got her apron on and everything, and look, those are miso soup stains on them. Uruka found himself feeling lightheaded and slightly dazed, more so when he realized that Naruto of all people and of all his students, was subconsciously using inductive and deductive techniques to glimmer information about things around him, and he didn't even realize it. He took in several deep breaths, before he decided to calm himself. Naruto, how many major hidden villages do we have? The blonde boy looked sheepish as he scratched his head. 2. How is it that? Uruka had to calm himself and lower his voice. How is it that you can accurately guess how many customers have visited Ichiraku ramen, and how many strands of noodles are in my bowl, but you don't know how many major hidden villages we have in the elemental nations? Because I don't care about that stuff. Who cares how many there are? Konoha is the greatest Dadbeo. Uruka sighed, shaking his head. Maybe he was just reading too much into things. Naruto spent most of his hours at Ichiraku ramen, and had more hours at the establishment than he probably did at his own home. With so much time spent there, it would explain his ability to pick out all the littlest details and things that happened around there with alarming detail and frightening efficiency. It wasn't like Naruto was some sort of hidden genius or anything. No, the very notion sounded utterly preposterous. A thought did however stumble onto the Chunin's mind, and for a few seconds, he contemplated it. Hey Naruto, tell me about how you do your pranking. Naruto stopped, staring at him suspiciously for several seconds. If this is a trick to find out where I keep my gear, Uruka-sensei. Uruka put his hands up in a gesture of surrender. No tricks. I'm genuinely curious. Some of your pranks must take careful planning and deliberation. I wonder how you got into it. Well, 2 hours later, Iruka was regretting his decision to ask. While he had been hoping to gain some more insight into Naruto's apparent analytical and deductive abilities, it seemed that those abilities only registered or came up when it came to Ichiraku ramen, or anything ramen related. Instead of finding out more about his student's mind, he was treated to a lecture on the different types of itching powder, the best paints to use for brighter colors, how to carefully set up feather traps, and all sorts of other information that the Chunin truly was not interested in. And then, you have to make sure that you wash your hands thoroughly or the itching powder might still be on you. That's great, Naruto. Wow, look at the time. I've got some scripts to mark and you've got to get ready for school tomorrow. But I haven't told how to use the rubber chicken yet. Iruka nodded, slowly. No need, you seem to have a mastery of pranking that I don't think I can achieve anytime soon. Naruto blushed before rubbing the back of his head with his arm. Really? Of course. And if you applied those pranking skills of yours to your shinobi knowledge, you might even make a brilliant strategist or trap master someday. Naruto's face furrowed up in confusion. What does pranking have to do with being a shinobi? Well, information gathering, reconnaissance, stealth, and the likes. Instead of, say, planting a stink bomb in someone's house, imagine instead planting an actual bomb, or some knockout gas instead. Iruka watched as the gears began slowly turning in Naruto's head. So I can prank people, just using deadlier and cooler stuff, and I could become a great shinobi for doing it. Sure, I don't see why not. Maybe, I could even become the Hokage that way. Iruka placed his hand on the boy's head and tousled his hair. Don't get ahead of yourself, Naruto. You'll need to make sure you don't fail the academy this time around, and actually learn things. We can't have a Hokage who doesn't know how many hidden villages exist, now can we? Naruto said nothing. Instead, his mind was whirling with ideas and thoughts, and slowly, but surely, a small spark of flame had lit itself within him. And that would make all the difference. Yumi no Iruka loved his home. It was a place where he was free from the troublesome nuances that were the lovable brats he called his students, a place where he did not have to scream out his lungs to get people to listen to the things he wanted to say, a place where he could put on his nice bunny fur slippers without hearing any snickers from resident class clowns, and pick up a book to read without screeches from fangirls. It was the most relaxing place in the world, where he could occasionally practice his shurikenjutsu without getting snorts from overachieving black-haired geniuses, and could likewise have freedom from the eccentricities of his superior commanding officers. Home was truly a place to be. It was for that reason that when Iruka had tucked into his bed at night, switched off his lamp, and said goodnight to his collection of unique plushy dolls, he had expected nothing else more than utter silence and pure, unending tranquility. Pissed. Iruka-sensei. Iruka's mellow eyes answered with a soft sigh. Of course, his subconscious would choose now of all times to mess with him and give him a dream about Naruto. Oh no, he wasn't going to let his mind win. He'd play along for now and see where this went. Yes, Naruto. You mentioned recon and information gathering. Does that mean it's okay to spy on people in the village? Like say Hokage Gigi. Iruka almost giggled. Like Naruto would actually have listened to what he said and then snuck into his house at 2 a.m. to ask such a question. The dream was just too funny to be true. Sure, Naruto, it's all part of being a good trap master. Best to have as much information on everyone as you need. Thanks, Iruka-sensei. You're the best. Naruto complimenting him. Iruka did giggle this time around. Sure. Don't forget to close the window on your way out. I will. There was a shuffle of movement, and suddenly, the sound of his window pane closing reached the Chunin's ears. It took him 4 seconds for his eyes to snap open as he realized that his dream had been far too realistic. He turned to the window, finding the curtain drawn open, and then he shook his head as he rolled back into bed. It was too much of a hassle to go find the blonde boy and tell him that it was probably not a good idea to try and spy on people in a shinobi village, but he figured the blonde wouldn't get very far in his attempt anyway. Besides, it was Naruto. What were the odds of him sneaking around the strongest shinobi in the entire village? Observation. The act or process of observing someone or something carefully in order to gain information. The process of observation was a tool which multiple shinobi relied upon in order to actively succeed in the field. One could even go as far as saying that it was the only thing that kept them alive. An unobservant shinobi was a dead shinobi, and that was a fact. Or at least, that used to be the way things were. Sarutobi Hiruzen sighed as he walked into his office, feeling his legs which had seen the dust of 3 shinobi wars weaken, and he gazed upon his desk with a cornucopia of mixed feelings and emotions. It was a shame, having come from another insufferable meeting made him realize just how much the shinobi world had changed. Back in the times of warring clans era, shinobi were not necessarily the up-and-go supernatural fighters that they were today. No, then, they relied purely on stealth, subterfuge, and assassinations. Living in that era meant always looking up, even when outside in broad daylight and on a large grassy plain several kilometers in length. It meant being cautious about every puddle of mud that you passed or about every shadow that so much as seemed to be moving in a suspicious manner. It meant always making sure you switched your drink with another one before taking it, and abandoning any plate of food which your eyes had strayed away from even for the briefest of seconds. Failure to do any of these would often end with one gracing upon the shining blade of the Shinigami, and wondering what had happened. The Sandaime Hokage sat, taking a brief sigh as he stared out into the empty office, his table filled with various documents, some half done, others waiting neatly to be signed, from important tasks like changing the Anbu patrol teams to utterly trivial requests like demanding for a subsidy for kunai traders. Trivial anyway, compared to other papers which had stamps from the daimyo and contained sensitive materials which could and would easily incriminate Konoha for the mysterious disappearances of many of the daimyo's rivals. The man shook his head, partially wondering when and why the days of shinobi had rapidly changed from being creatures of the night to being flashy show-offs capable of setting forests on fire and utterly remodeling the landscape with their battles. In this era, the prominence of stealth and subterfuge had taken a nosedive, and every young child who entered the academy dreamed of making tsunamis and causing thunderstorms. It was only when reality came crashing down as many lacked the chakra capacity for such feats, did they eventually settle for more mediocre positions. Alas, the Hokage stopped his musing, realizing that such thought were wasted on an old man like him anyway. It seemed that there was a new generation afloat, and soon enough he would become nothing but a relic. Shrugging, he ensured that there was none of his Anbu in his office, before allowing a small, somewhat excited smile to come up to his face as he stared at the bottommost drawer of his table. He may not often appreciate his students' conduct when it dealt with women, but even he could not deny that the man wrote some very interesting materials. He reached for the drawer, and slowly, but surely, he pulled it open, his perverted grin widening slightly. If asked about the event later on, Hiruzen Sarutobi would deny ever being surprised. However, it did not mean that he was not surprised, as his eyes widened to levels that would cause even dojutsu wielders like the Hyuga to feel uncomfortable, as the drawer opened, and consequently, his face was filled with the cold, but not entirely unpleasant texture of what he instantly recognized as a banana cream pie. He stared, ludicrous, as the plate of pie slid off his face, and landed onto the ground with a slow, methodic thump, and it just so happened that the loud sound triggered the Anbu agents outside who burst in, eyes searching for any intruder. The 2 agents paused, staring at their Hokage, and though Hiruzen could most definitely not see through their porcelain masks, he was certain that they were doing everything possible not to show their mirth. It wasn't every day you saw the Hokage's face plastered with pie. Are you 2 going to stand there and stare at me, or would you like to taste the Hokage's pie? His words seemed to jar them, and it was almost like he was daring them to laugh. Yes, Laugh at the man who could demote you to a genin and make you spend the rest of your entire military career scooping dog poop. Go on, laugh. Thankfully, they had more common sense than that, and the female Anbu, codenamed Nako, had the decency of handing him a fresh towel. The old man cleaned the cake from his face with the towel, before placing it down, his eyes doing their best to refuse twitching in annoyance. There was one person who would actually have the gall, the means, and the motive to think about pranking him, and though somehow he had never been the target of his pranks, Sarutobi Hiruzen was going to make it clear that one does not simply shove pie in the Hokage's face and get away with it. Bring me Uzumaki Naruto. Hi Hokage-sama. His Anbu vanished with the familiar gust of wind that indicated the Shunshin technique, and the Sandaime Hokage let himself sit back with a sigh. He had never had to truly berate or reprimand Naruto for anything before, but there were some lines that could not be crossed. The mere fact of breaking into his office too. Hiruzen blinked. How had the pranking menace entered his office to set up the pie in the first place? It was impossible to do so from the back windows, they were firmly locked and had been so for a while. There was no way his secretary would have let him in, let alone the entire Chunin workstation that aided in organizing missions. He opened up the drawer once more, staring at the contraption that was within it which had aided in launching the pie. A weak string, with some sort of makeshift pulley device attached to the handle, along with a large metal spring. The sting would activate the pulley when he opened the drawer, and the pulley would in turn fire the string. The Hokage wasn't stupid. There was a creeping chill that came upon him once he realized how easily it would have been to substitute the pie for a kunai, or the trap for a loaded crossbow, and he would be dead. Hiruzen took in a deep breath, finding his pipe idly laying on the table, before reaching for it, stuffing it with the required fuel and putting it to his lips, igniting it with a small fire technique, and letting the acrid taste of the smoke permeate his tongue, before he blew it into the air and leaned back into his chair. They were in a time of relative peace granted, and no one would be able to maintain their sanity for too long if they acted as though every single thing and every single one was out to get them, whilst even in the comfort of their own village, and comfort of their own office, but had he truly become that lax? It seemed he would need to start training again. The office was filled with a brief poof of smoke, and the familiar blonde menace known as Uzumaki Naruto appeared before him, grinning like a maniac as he was held by two Anbu agents. Sarutobi steeled his features. Naruto. Whatever he was about to say was cut in half by the boy's boisterous shout. About time, Gigi. You ended your meeting way later than normal today. I almost thought the prank failed. Hiruzen was able to dissect the boy's sentences, and the semantic meanings he attained from them being heavier than the words themselves. In reverse order, Naruto was outright admitting that the prank was his, then, he was admitting to possessing prior knowledge about the fact that he was in a meeting, and lastly, he was anticipating being called to the office. Hiruzen stopped whatever he was going to say, his steeled features softening for a bit as he shook his head. Why did you put the pie in my drawer, Naruto-kun? The boy smiled as though what he did was not an action that would get people executed in other villages. I wanted to see you. Hiruzen blinked. You wanted to see me? Naruto nodded. Hiruzen looked at the two Anbu, giving them the signal that they could leave, and they vanished in a puff of smoke that left stars in Naruto's eyes. Cool. Gigi, can you teach me how to do that? Hiruzen shook his head. Later, Naruto. For now, explain yourself. If you wanted to see me, you could simply just walk in and ask. Naruto gave an exasperated groan. I did try it, Gigi. I usually come by whenever you're not in a meeting, but all I get is, he increased the pitch of his voice to an eerily close resemblance of that of his female secretary, you can't see the Hokage without booking an appointment. Or, Hokage-sama isn't here right now. Or, Hokage-sama is currently resting. Or, shouldn't you be in the academy right now, and all that junk. Hiruzen allowed a small smile to come up to his face. It cannot be helped, Naruto-kun, being the Hokage is an extremely time-taking endeavor. Naruto rolled his eyes and crossed his arms, sighing. Hi, I know Gigi, you told me that the last time you visited me. The Sandame was about to ask, I did, but he was stopped by the stab of guilt which caught him. He couldn't even remember the last time he had visited the young boy's apartment, but he knew for a fact that it hadn't been in months at the very best and years at worst. Even on the boy's birthdays, he always found himself too occupied to so much as drop in for a visit. Hells, he couldn't even remember the last time he gave him a birthday present. It wasn't exactly neglect, as the heaven knew that he had done his best where the boy was concerned, though, it was not enough. Sometimes the man wondered why Naruto looked up to him with such respect and reverie. Heaven knew that he was undeserving of it. He coughed into his hand, searching for a way to dissect the topic. What else did I tell you? Huh. The blonde seemed to stall at the odd question, before scratching his chin. Well, you told me to clean up my apartment, and that one of the steps to being Hokage is being neat and organized. He smiled. I suppose that is true. It's one of those things you'll have to build up over the years. What do you mean? I'm neat and organized. The Hokage's eyes crinkled in mirth. Really? Hell yeah, my apartment floor is so shiny I could eat ramen off it. He gave a grin before pausing. The only reason I don't is because ramen is too divine to touch the floor. The Hokage let out a small chuckle. He, however, had not lost sight of the numerous questions that were in his head. Naruto-kun, how did you know I was in a meeting? Huh. The ramen addict squinted his eyes in a manner that made him look as though he was a fox. Everyone knows when you're in a meeting. No, they did not. Knowing when the Hokage was and was not in his office was sensitive information, as it would be very easy for an enemy shinobi to utilize that information for a trap, just as Naruto had utilized the information to stage his prank. Just humor me, Naruto-kun. The blonde scratched his cheeks before shrugging. I used to visit the tower almost every day, Gigi. Whenever you're out, you can always see the Chunin guys at the front desk lounging off, and when I meet your secretary, she says you're not in or unavailable. When you're here, the front desk guys get all super Chunin and serious with their work and stuff, and your secretary either says you're tired, or I have to book an appointment. Hiruzen's lips thinned, and he made a mental note to question his secretary later, as well as to schedule some impromptu arrivals for his Chunin. It was a theory, but he just felt the need to confirm it. Naruto-kun, on Thursdays at 12, what would I be doing? The blonde looked at him. Huh, well, I guess you'd be out till around 3. Hiruzen's breath stilled. And Saturdays, at that time. Naruto's nose upturned in the air. You'd either go out for lunch or order for some takeout. You never order Ichiraku ramen though, and that sucks, Gigi. It's always either fish balls or onigiri. He could feel his heartbeat rise. How? He calmed himself, clearing his throat as his voice became more leveled. Naruto-kun, did you know what I usually order? Naruto frowned. 'Cause I usually see the Chunin who come back in with the takeout. What makes you believe that the takeout was mine? Naruto scratched his chin. It's kinda weird and wrong for Chunin to buy takeout and bring it back to the tower and eat it here, when they coulda just used the time spent to buy takeout to, eat out. Hiruzen slowly nodded. Yes, that's true. Hiruzen watched as the resident prankster seemed to stare at him with something in his eyes akin to recognition and curiosity, and if the Hokage did not know better, he would claim that the boy's eyes gained a certain level of depth and focus to them, resonating brilliantly in a manner that he had only ever seen from geniuses the likes of Namikaze Minato, Uchiha Itachi, and most frighteningly, Orochimaru. Then as soon as it appeared, it was gone, and the blonde boy squinted his eyes, crossed his arms behind his head and pouted. Oi, what's up, Gigi? I mean, everyone notices these things and it's no big deal, right? The Sandame simply stared at him, snapping out of his bizarre trance as he realized that clearly the young boy did not realize memorizing the Hokage's schedule was in fact a very big deal. That was not even counting knowing what the Hokage would eat. Slowly, stirring deep within him, Hiruzen Sarutobi found himself reinvigorated, as that spark, the display of what he had thought long lost in the ways of shinobi, keen observation, had seemingly been brought out in full force, in the most unexpected and unlikely of persons. Hiruzen shook his head. He had established that Naruto knew his schedule like he knew the back of his hand, which was unexpected, but not overwhelming impossible. Human beings were creatures of habit and pattern. You did things at expected and designated times, and most people had a routine that they followed every day. Wake up at a certain time, train at a certain time, eat at a certain time, which could not just be abandoned, otherwise one's life would be in utter disarray. What Hiruzen could not for the life of him figure out was how Naruto had entered his office in the first place. A question he did not hesitate to ask. Oh, that's simple. I hanged into a broomstick and let the cleaners carry me in this morning. Hiruzen's eyebrows rose greatly. Naruto-kun, that is not how the transformation technique works. Naruto's eyes squinted. Nani? The henge is a weaker class genjutsu and all it does is allow you to apply an illusionary layer over yourself that merely looks like a different thing. The Hokage picked up his pipe, letting himself drag from it. If the henge was a solid transformation, every shinobi with access to it would use it to grant themselves shapeshifter abilities like turning their hands into swords. Naruto's eyes gleamed, and Hiruzen regretted his utterance upon noticing the look in the resident prankster's eyes, which practically yelled, "Challenge accepted." Henge. Hiruzen could only let his pipe fall from his lips as he watched a single, one-edged, Anbu edition katana appear in front of him with a burst of smoke, eliminating the boy in its place. The Hokage rose up, feeling his ankles groan slightly as he reached the blade, grabbing it, and actually swinging it around like it was an actual sword. He put his hand to the edge and actually watched as a small trail of blood emerged from the cut. Amazing. He placed the sword down and it transformed back into the blonde, who was grinning with an "I told you so" expression on his face. You're oversaturating the technique with chakra. Over what? You have very large chakra reserves, Naruto. As a result, you're oversaturating your techniques. His tone took on one which befitted his title as the professor. Fundamentally, when you oversaturate a technique like, say, a fireball, all you would get would be a roaring wildfire, and likewise when you oversaturate something like a water gun, you would get a tsunami. Of course, this lack of control and precision is expected with elemental techniques, but the henge isn't an elemental jutsu. Hence, all the excess chakra had nowhere else to go but back into the technique, granting the illusion tangibility and giving you the properties of whatever you transformed into, though I highly doubt it grants you the same durability. Hiruzen finished, expecting to find Naruto either looking at him with awestruck eyes, or with orbs clearly lost in confusion, but instead, what he found was that same focused look again, one that seemed to wield a surprising amount and made his orbs look like the view of the ocean from across a horizon. But, then why can't I make a single stupid bunshin? Shouldn't I be making like thousands of them instead? You are having problems with the bunshin technique. That's the first I've heard of this. The stupid thing is the reason I failed the graduation exam. Hiruzen rubbed his beard as his eyes slowly closed in contemplation. Show me. He watched as Naruto moved into the familiar seal, feeling the massive build-up of chakra before the room was engulfed in smoke. Bunshin. Once the smoke cleared, Hiruzen spotted 4 pale, lifeless facsimiles surrounding the boy, none of which would be capable of fooling infants for even a split second. I see. The technique requires less chakra, and oversaturating it causes it to lose its effectiveness as the illusions have more chakra than they actively need to function. Think of it as having more blood in your body than your heart can properly pump and process. You will not pop immediately, but you certainly will not operate at normal capacity. Naruto frowned, staring at the man. So how do I fix it? The Hokage rubbed his chin. Simple. You simply need to utilize better chakra control exercises. The greater the control of chakra you have, the less likely you are to oversaturate your techniques. He walked over to the wall, where portraits of Hokage's past hung, and moved aside his own portrait to reveal a safe within it. He turned the dial, the numbers still clear in his head before swinging it open. He began searching, pulling from within it several files before he eventually found one dusty, extremely faded-looking sealing scroll. He looked at the scroll, contemplating it for a few seconds, the memories which the scroll possessed and their sheer nostalgic value for a brief moment, seemed to overwhelm the pragmatic use of handing it to the boy and passing on of knowledge to the future generation. Shaking his head, he eventually handed over the scroll to Naruto. The boy seemed smart enough to be able to work with it, and he wasn't a shinobi just yet, merely an academy student. That, Naruto-kun, contains what I used to teach my pupils, several years ago. From different jottings and notes, to the very basics of chakra control, all of it is yours to peruse. Naruto stared at him with wide eyes. Why you're giving me this? I don't know what to say, Gigi. No one's ever given me anything like this before. Hiruzen's heart clenched. Well, Naruto-kun, consider it a gift from me to you. Once you graduate from the academy and become a genin, feel free to come by and I just might teach you a jutsu or two. Really? He winked at him. I am called the professor, Naruto-kun. I think it would only be fitting for me to profess as much knowledge as I can. He did not quite anticipate the hug from the young boy as he tackled his leg, before letting out a melancholic smile as he patted his head. Thanks, Gigi. You're the best. Think nothing of it, Hiruzen said, as Naruto detached himself from him. So Naruto-kun, why exactly did you want to see me that would make you resort to trapping pies in my office? Naruto tilted his head in seeming confusion. I just wanted to see you. Do I need a reason to want to see you? Hiruzen opened his mouth, and then he closed it, a warm feeling entering him that he had long since forgotten. No. The Hokage smiled. I suppose you don't. Aburame Shino. Here. Abashi Tenma. Hi Sensei. Binshi Roku. Present. Yamanaka Ino took in a series of deep breaths as she decided to calm herself. She was a member of the Yamanaka clan, which prided itself in its mind arts, and as such, she, as well as numerous others privy to the intricacies and delicacies of the clan's workings, were expected to keep a level head, and to calmly analyze any and all scenarios which came before her. The Joninyu would find angrily snarling as he kicked a stone down the street and brandished his kunai at any minor offense was more than often troubled, and his temporary anger which he displayed was not an enduring personality trait, but rather, more than likely it was a standalone feature that had arose due to external circumstances. Hyuga Hinata. Hi Sensei. Inazuka Kiba. I'm here Sensei. Arf. Arf. Her father had taught her more than once, to always keep an eye on the people around her, as that was how you knew the good shinobi from the bad ones, and it was always best to avoid getting on the bad sides of certain individuals who may or may not be deemed unstable. He had also told her not to judge others, as well as to avoid having any undue prejudice against people, because no one existed with their entire life stories trailing behind them, and as such, they all had different reasons or motivations for one thing or another. This, of course, did not mean that Yamanaka Ino was able to take all that advice to heart, especially when it did her absolutely no damned good. Uchiha Sasuke. Here. Uzumaki Naruto. Silence. Uzumaki Naruto. Ino did her best to try and remain unflappable, desperately fighting the urge to shrink into her seat with all vehemence. Of course, the dog breath just had to have noticed it, as he gave her what she easily considered to be the sixth most irritating grin in existence, as he spoke up. Naruto still hasn't shown up for class, Mizuki-sensei. The canine enthusiast yelled out, once more speculating the rumors that went flying around the class. Is that so? Yeah, it's been 3 weeks since we had to deal with the orange idiot. I guess we have you to thank for that, Ino. Once more, Ino resisted the urge to shrink as the eyes of everyone in the class fell upon her. Sasuke-kun was staring at her. He was actually looking her direction, which, on any other occasion, would have made her feel giddy with joy, but his eyes were not looking at her in the same way she would have wanted him to. Of course, she was Yamanaka Ino, so despite her own inner thoughts, she ensured, meticulously, that her own body language and outward appearance constantly maintained the aura and look of someone who was utterly self-assured, utterly confident, and did not, for even the briefest of seconds, doubt herself. I don't know what you're on about, Mudface. He growled. Yeah, right. You think we didn't hear about how the blonde knucklehead asked you out and you turned him down flat cold? The mumbles and rumors were spreading to a level she did not find herself particularly comfortable with. So, he asks forehead over there out on a daily basis, and she turns him down all the time. Said pink-haired bimbo let out a shout of indignation at being called forehead, that Ino promptly ignored. Well, except she never turned him down hard enough for the idiot to just up and vanish for 3 weeks. Hell, I haven't even seen him around the ramen stand that he loves like it's his mother. Correlation does not equal causation, she had wanted to say, but she restrained her tongue from emitting the initial consonant because she knew that it would go over Kiba's head, and more importantly than that, it would only either mean that Shikamaru had been rubbing off on her more than she would like, or that she was another nerd-like forehead girl. And how is any of it my fault? For all we know, he could have just woken up one day and decided to drop out. Geez, I don't get you, Kiba said, scowling. It's not like the knucklehead ever had any real hopes of becoming a shinobi, and I'm sure even academy teachers have tried more than once to get him to quit, but you managed to pull it off with a few words, so why the hell won't you take the credit? Yamanaka Ino blinked, then rapidly resisted the urge to yell and instead bit the inside of her cheek. Take the credit. She was supposed to be proud of harshly turning down Naruto's enthusiastic, bubbly request for a date. To feel accomplished that she had shot down someone's confident advances, when there were numerous hopeless romantics out there who would never even possess a shred of that same courage to brazenly ask out someone they fancied. She stared at Kiba, wondering if the boy even fully understood the implications of what he was saying, and she sorely doubted that he did. What she found doubly disconcerting, however, was that there were numerous other people in the class, who for one reason or another, actually shared in Kiba's sentiments. For Kami's sake, no matter how annoying or how bright or how obnoxious Naruto was, the boy had done literally nothing wrong for people to feel completely vindicated by the fact that he was potentially heartbroken enough to stop coming to school. But she did not voice that. No. She was not a person easily cowed by peer pressure, but she was a person who cared about her image. The knuckleheads around her would one day in nearest future possibly be her teammates that she would need to rely on in the field, and as such, it was best to move with the flow of the crowd, to be of the same mind regarding certain topics, and to ensure that she was not viewed too differently or ostracized. Idly, her mind noted a lesson her father had once showed her, during one of their clan training sessions. A brief experiment where he had brought up 3 kunai, 2 of them were 12 inches and 1 was 11, and then showed it to a group of 8 volunteers, asking them to pick the shortest. 7 of the volunteers were in on the experiment, and all picked the wrong kunai, but the actual subject was confused, and he knew that the kunai picked was the wrong one, yet, in order to avoid being at odds with the group, went ahead and picked it anyway. Yamanaka Ino was an impressionable 12-year-old girl with just a few months left to graduate and become a shinobi. This was true, but she was also the daughter of Konoha's foremost psychologist, who was the head of Konohagakure's torture and interrogation department. She was the friend to a genius with an IQ of 200 that occasionally made rare quips and comments that belied his extraordinary intelligence, despite his outwardly lazy persona. Then, she the heiress of a clan that could casually stroll through your mind like a schoolboy galloping a field of flowers and make your tongue unleash your deepest desires. Even without using their clan techniques. As such, Yamanaka Ino knew exactly what to do. Slamming her hand on her desk, she twirled her hair, placed her hand on her hip and let out a huff, utterly turning away from Kiba's question. Kiba's eyes narrowed. So it's not that you don't want to take the credit. You just wanted us to make you think you didn't care. You were pretending all along, weren't you? Whatever makes you happy, mud breath. Why you? Mizuki-sensei clapped. That's enough. Kiba, if you have any problem with Ino, take it out in taijutsu practice. Assuming you can. A collection of snickers went up at the room at the slight. It was one time Mizuki-sensei. I lost to her one time. Yamanaka Ino did not focus on any of this, however. Instead, her mind found itself begrudgingly drifting towards someone with blonde hair and blue eyes. Why had Naruto suddenly asked her out if he was supposed to be infatuated with Sakura? Had he known what she was up to and then did it to save her face? Was that why she found herself questioning her infatuation with Sasuke now and then? She had doubted Shikamaru's words before about Naruto being observant, adding up to another time the pineapple-haired Nara had been right, and Kami knew that if Shikamaru wasn't so lazy, half of their conversations would be filled with, "I told you so." Still, it just didn't seem to fit. If Naruto was so observant, why was he the dead last? Did graduating and becoming a shinobi not matter to his interests? She found herself biting on the edge of her pen and took in a deep breath. It seemed like she knew what she was going to do after school today, solving the enigma that was Uzumaki Naruto. Assuming she could find him. Within interest. Naruto. There had been a lot of odd things that Akamichi Choji had seen in his life, from vanishing pieces of cake, to people who utterly ruined the concept of a good meal, to even things such as pineapple on pizza. He shuddered. Nevertheless, despite having seen so many odd things in his brief few years alive, he would say that he had never felt more conflicted nor had he ever felt more uncertain on what to do, when he saw his blonde classmate, Uzumaki Naruto, rummaging through the trash cans of the Akamichi clan compound, more specifically, his trash can. Gah! Venison, steak, mutton, why are they so many different bones? I don't even know what this one is supposed to be, turkey or rabbit. Choji awkwardly stopped eating from his famous bag of chips, rubbing his arm in a particular manner that didn't aid in alleviating the awkwardness. It had now been 4 weeks since Naruto had shown up in class, and Ino had been reserved ever since there were some allegations that it was because she had broken his heart that Naruto had been skipping out on school. Choji thought that it was a lot of baloney, but Ino didn't feel that way, and no one knew what to make of the situation. This past week, however, the blonde had been seen out of class, doing numerous odd things. For instance, he had been sniffed out by Kiba on one occasion, and after being called out, he admitted that he was planning on pranking the Inuzuka. Likewise, the same thing occurred for Shino, and no one knew why he would even want to prank those two. Now, however, Choji did not know what to make of seeing Naruto doing that. Of course, the Akamichi didn't particularly know just how lucky he was, to have been born into a major clan, to have had loving parents and to enjoy magnificent meals every day, and though it was easy to forget, Naruto had no parents, had no one to cook for him, and pretty much lived on his own. He never truly realized how privileged he was until he saw his own classmates seemingly scrounging for scraps. Naruto, you don't need to eat out of the trash can, we've got plenty of food. Naruto stopped scrounging, the light of the slowly setting evening sun casting a weird glow as he raised his head from the pile of dirt and his eyes regarded Choji with a confused expression. I said you don't need to eat out of the trash can. What? This? I'm not that pathetic that I'd scrounge around dumpsters for food. Choji stared at him, a cool breeze passing by that somehow seemed to cement his words. True, Naruto did seem to be the type that was too proud to actually be seen doing something like that. Then, what are you doing? That thing you do where you take old stuff and make new things with it, what is it called again? You're recycling. He snapped his fingers in confirmation, grinning. Yeah, that's it. Recycling. Naruto, you're only meant to recycle papers, plastics and metals, not junk food items. The blonde blinked owlishly. Says who? Choji shrugged, watching as Naruto seemingly pondered about it for all of 3 seconds, before hefting over a large bag over his shoulder and dropped it on the ground, wiping the sweat off his brow. Now that the young Akamichi heir thought about it, he realized that Naruto shouldn't even be in their clan compound, much less searching through their trash. How had he passed the guards and the gate? This haul was awesome. With this, I'm going to become the greatest shinobi that ever lived, Dadbeo. Shoji stared at him with no small amount of confusion. With trash, Naruto grinned. With treasure. Shoji was looking at him owlishly. I don't understand. Your favorite chip brand is the Tachino chips. You never buy the really saltier versions and stick to the bags instead of the cans because you hate it when you can't get your hands down in it to get the last ones. Shoji blinked. Tachino chips are kinda rare though, really rare, and freaking expensive too. And you breeze through about 6 a day, every day. That's not even counting all the feasts you call dinner. Shoji, you're loaded. Shoji choked on his potato chip. And not just you, your entire clan is loaded too. I mean, I didn't even know that the Akamichi clan totally owned like half of the farmlands that make all the food that everyone in Konoha eats. But you guys are so cool and mellow that no one realizes that you're the richest clan in MMPH. Shoji had heard enough as he proceeded to cover Naruto's mouth, eyes darting left and right as he let out a sigh. Good-hearted boy and avid foodie he was, but he was also being groomed to be the future head of said Akamichi clan, and there were some things that needed to be left under wraps. Yes, the Akamichi clan was rich, stinky damn rich, probably richer than the Hyuga and the Inuzuka clans combined. Of course, the reason why their wealth hadn't drawn undue attention was because they were also the most underestimated clan in Konoha. They were the big friendly giants who simply loved their meals and would leave you alone in peace as long as you did not mention anything about their weight. As such, no one would ever find anything wrong with these people having extraordinary wealth. Of course, the Akamichi found no problem with it, being underestimated suit them just fine. Naruto, how did you know all that? Just think about it, Shoji. He had a glint in his eye. Garbage tells all. The stuff you throw in the trash can tells way more about you than you can believe. The blonde began counting on his fingers. Uruka-sensei's hobby is woodworking, his favorite drink is cherry juice, and he eats tons of fruits and cooks all his meals himself. Sakura-chan uses 3 different conditioners at the same time, and she's on a diet for now. Sasuke-tem seems to like tomatoes a lot, and he's a terrible cook. Shoji brought him to a stop. It was impressive, unorthodox and greatly breaching the privacy of several people, but impressive nonetheless. Naruto, just how many people's garbage have you scrounged through? The blonde paused for a second, before shrugging. Counting you, everyone. Shoji almost choked on his chips again. Everyone in Konoha. Huh, no, I meant everyone I know. He gave a proud grin. Why do you think I haven't been at the academy for a while? Shoji calmed down significantly at that. So Naruto had been doing recon on every individual he knew. That's incredible. You're telling me I had to henge into a one-legged cat to fool the Hyuga clan guards, and cover myself in puppy piss just to fool the Inuzuka dogs, and don't even get me started on the Aburame and their insects. Akamichi Shoji stood, slightly confused, slightly impressed, and a little bit annoyed at the fact that Naruto had somehow chosen him for last, until he reminded himself that technically what Naruto was doing was a huge breach of privacy, though he seemed not to realize it, or care. Shoji contemplated if he should tell Naruto that it was somewhat, well, not exactly illegal, just a teensy bit immoral for him to go through other people's trash. Then again, it was garbage, people rarely gave much thought to their garbage, and they probably did not realize that what you threw away could tell a lot about who you were, what you did, what you liked and what you ate. Somehow, Naruto had figured that out. But, why? Why are you going through everyone's garbage? At that Naruto grinned. It's for my bingo book. Why you're what? You see, Hokage Gigi gave me this super cool scroll that he used to teach his students and stuff, and when I looked through it, I saw that his students left all kinds of doodles and drawings and jottings all over it. Naruto heaved the heavy bag of garbage on his shoulder. So one of Hokage Gigi's students, this guy called Maru, jotted down that he had always wanted to gain complete information about all his nakama in Konoha. Said he'd started working on it, and had his own bingo book and stuff, but never completed it. Naruto rubbed his chin. Was a bit weird though, there were stuff about blood type and searching for bloodlines, and stuff, but I thought the general idea would be awesome. I mean, if I'm gonna become the Hokage, the leader of everyone, I've gotta at least know them right. At this he frowned. But people don't really talk to me for some weird reason. Stupid teams must just be jealous of my awesomeness datbayo. He said with a grin, so I recycled their trash, and used the stuff I learned to fill up the book. Choji wanted to tell him that some people were averse to talking to him because of his general orangeness, but he didn't have the heart to do so. Plus, I'm working on being Konoha's greatest trap specialist. I'm going to use my pranking skills to become the greatest shinobi in the world. Believe it. So, I kinda need some of the trash to help build up my arsenal. Brilliant. It was a word which had a nimity of meanings, each one more elevated than the last. Placing those who were referred as that word was to place them on a magnificent glass pedestal, and Akamichi Choji had not assumed that he would be running into another individual that could leave him as odd as his best friend Shikamaru. He found it even odder considering that he was attributing this word to Naruto of all people, and though the boy did not realize it, what he had done, what he was doing was sheer brilliance. He was considered the dead last, but most likely he was the one taking their future occupation as shinobi the most seriously. Gah, I've got to run. Higurashi weapon stores usually toss out some old rusty kunai and metal I can use around this time. See you around, Choji. Choji blinked, drawn from his reverie as he realized that he had just found the elusive boy that his friend had been trying to track down for the past week with no chance of success. Wait, Naruto, Ino's been looking for you. The boy was gone, leaving Choji standing in place and conspicuously staring at the garbage pile. A mere pile of garbage that had made Naruto of all people easily realize the not-so-hidden secret of the Akamichi clan. From now on, no more leftovers. The sound of crackling potato chips and hearty receding footsteps echoed off into Konoha's twilight. What was the difference between intelligence and wisdom? This was the question Yamanaka Inoichi asked himself as he plopped down on his couch, a tired sigh on his lips and a long-worn furrow on his brow, just now finally concluded from a long day at the office. Some would say that intelligence was possessing knowledge. An intelligent person had the savoir-faire of numerous different fields or areas, such as someone who had memorized entire aspects of a thesaurus, or someone who could calculate complex mathematical figures on the fly. Then, they would say that wisdom was possessing the ability to use said knowledge in the adequate scenarios to achieve the optimum result. Except, that was not true. That was the relationship between intelligence and wisdom and not the distinction. Intelligence and wisdom were somewhat separate, as one could be wise, in the manner of an enlightened monk or spiritual individual, but they would not be smart, such as monks that could neither read nor write. Likewise, one could be smart, possessing a great deal of knowledge about numerous aspects and fields, but not necessarily wise. For instance, a scientist who chose to give his children extremely efficient meals and prevented them from eating sweets because he knew the health detriments, but was unable to realize that his children would never understand his perspective. Unfortunately, it seemed that people regarded intelligence on the higher spectrum than wisdom. Konoha was gradually running out of wise young shinobi and instead, they were breeding geniuses. If only his beloved village could have a Sarutobi Hiruzen for every Uchiha Itachi and Hatake Kakashi, it would be so much better off. Unfortunately, most levels of wisdom came with experience, and as such, those greatly in need of it sorely lacked the access to it. Shameful as it was, Inoichi knew full well that his village was filled with people lacking both intelligence and wisdom. Most obviously would be the civilians first, who would willingly let their children sign up to the academy, fooled by the romanticized ideal of the Konoha Shinobi Corps. They were nothing but glorified child soldiers capable of taking on full-grown men twice their size, but child soldiers no less. Most of them would not live to hit 30, and those who did would be so scarred by the things that they had witnessed and performed, that they could never live normally ever again. But the will of fire burned strong, how strong it burned indeed. Fire was the one thing most capable of bringing unlimited destruction to leaves, yet not a soul had noted the irony. Konoha's head of T&I shook his head as he let out a deep sigh. The question and deliberations had not struck him on some utterly odd whim, and he was not usually someone to start thinking about such topics, but perhaps the reason the question had struck him had been because he had been watching his daughter recently. Ino was his pride and joy, and of course, he had done his best to lavish his little princess the way any father would, but he made sure he never cosseted her too much, especially if she wanted to be a kunoichi. He was initially adamant against her decision to even enroll, but he had no choice. Had his daughter said she wanted to become a horticulturist or a botanist or a psychologist rather than a kunoichi, not a single soul in the world, dead or alive, legend or nightmare, would have been capable of forcing him to tell her otherwise. But of course, his daughter wanted to be a kunoichi. He had no choice left but to respect her decision, or lose her love and respect forever. Despite training to be a powerful, lethal weapon, she was still a young girl though, and as such, he had been more than happy when she showed the signs of her youth, such as an adolescent crush. His only wish was that Ino would have at least picked a crush that was not so mentally scarred, but in the end, he had left her to her own devices. Until now, he had begun noticing in the past 4 weeks how much his little princess was changing. There had been a little bit more interest in the way she listened to his tales at the office, and as he explained to her bits and pieces of the psychology that people took for granted. Then of course, the frequency at which she mentioned the Uchiha's name had hit a sudden decline. Whereas he could have previously counted a minimum of 16 counts per day, it had dropped to a mere 5, and each time the topic was brought up, she bit her lips, her eyes furrowed, and her nose rose, just a smidgen. Something or someone had made her re-evaluate her infatuation, and she was inwardly conflicted. He would usually leave the issues of boys to her mother to handle, not because he was inept, but rather because he felt there would be more of a bond between his wife and his daughter discussing over such sensitive feminine issues. Of course, when she began leaving the house and returning each day, looking more tired and frustrated than the previous, he decided to intervene. Ino-chan, is there anything bothering you that you want to tell me? She had pursed her lips. Well, her hesitation alone was not a good sign. I did something, I think I did something, to someone, that might have been kind of bad, and I've been trying to find them to apologize, or explain, or something, but. Inoichi eased her. Calm down Ino-chan, go gently, from the start. She frowned. What do you do when someone just changes? Does things they've never done before? Or if their actions don't match what you know about them? Inoichi rose an eyebrow. Is this about a boy? Ino sighed. Yes, daddy. Ino, I've never really supported your crush on Uchiha Sasuke, but if he's the reason for why you've been so emotionally frustrated. It's not about Sasuke. Those words threw Inoichi for a loop, his mind recoiling as it tried to wrap itself around that information. First, there had been no affectionate suffix added to the name, and second, his daughter had another crush that wasn't the mentally perturbed survivor of the Uchiha clan massacre. It's not. Then who? It's Naruto. That suddenly, Inoichi's mind slammed the brakes hard at that point. Naruto. As in, Uzumaki Naruto. The resident prankster of Konoha. The secret orphan son of the Yondaime Hokage. The current container for Kyubi no Yoko, the strongest of all tailed beasts that had ravaged Konoha 12 years ago. Nope. 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 Why? Why couldn't this be easy? Why couldn't his daughter just be interested in some no-named average boy? He would have taken a boy with greased hair that wore 20 types of leather and I heart mom tattoo plastered on his left shoulder, over him. He had no personal bias against the boy, but he did have a personal interest to keep his daughter safe no matter what, and unfortunate as it was, merely being a Jinchuriki put him on the list of people to get Ino as far away from as possible. He did not fear the boy going out of control, for he trusted the Yondaime's sealing ability, but the sheer power he wielded would put him in the crosshairs of powerful and dangerous individuals. Individuals that he did not want 1,000 feet near his daughter. He needed to defuse this situation very carefully. Ino-chan, you said Naruto suddenly did what now? He asked me out. What? I know. That was my reaction too. He spent half of the time in the academy pestering Sakura for dates, and she turns him down, and then all of a sudden, he just asks me. Why? Why all of a sudden and then the way he did it? She abruptly stopped, and Inoichi's eyes narrowed. There was information that his daughter was intentionally keeping out of the discussion. Anyway, Shika says that it's because Naruto is actually really observant when he's dealing with things that catch his interest. He did. Inoichi knew that Nara Shikamaru was just as astute as his father, perhaps even more so, but he was lacking in the much-needed wisdom that would probably make him surpass Shikaku. He did, but it doesn't make sense. If he's so observant about stuff, why do his grades suck so much and why is he the dead last? Inoichi swore under his breath. Champing breadsticks. If what Ino was telling him was true, then there were two possible unfortunate implications, neither of which was comforting, and both of which constituted as threats or serious issues to Konoha's safety. The first implication was that Uzumaki Naruto was intentionally downplaying all his skills and abilities, for whatever possible reason, and depending on how observant he truly was, it was more than likely that he knew who his father was, and what was sealed inside of his stomach, yet opted to keep it to himself. When children found themselves out of their depth or seeking knowledge or wisdom, they looked to adult authorities for guidance and explanation. If Uzumaki Naruto was aware of his true heritage, and of the reasons of the numerous bias against him, and the fact that a giant beast was sealed inside his gut yet had intellectually chosen not to mention it or blurt it out, and continued as though absolutely nothing was wrong, then there was a problem. From a psychological standpoint, it was downright terrifying and it marked him as a greater flight risk than Uchiha Sasuke ever could be. The second implication, of course, was somewhat lighter, and it meant that there were serious levels of bias against the boy, and he was more than likely being either taught wrongly, or intentionally failed in order to ensure that he did not graduate. It meant that there were shinobi amongst the ranks who had let personal bias interfere with objective judgment, and they needed to be sanctioned and undergo screening to see if they were truly worthy of being in the shinobi corps. After all, if you let your emotions bleed into your job when all you did was to teach, who was to say that on a mission, you would not choose to let your emotions take sway and then instead of assassinating a target, you let them escape? Of course, if Uzumaki Naruto was being taught wrongly, would he not have complained? Or was it that he was unaware of the fact? But if he was unaware of the fact, that brought his supposed perceptive prowess into question. Daddy, you're making that constipated face again. God damn it, Shikaku. He sighed. Having that man as a best friend for the greater half of his life had made him paranoid and caused him to analyze things more than was sometimes needed. For all he knew, Shikaku's son was wrong, and Uzumaki Naruto was not some overly perceptive genius mastermind intentionally hiding his skills in order to be severely underestimated by the Konohan populace whilst he plotted revenge for being ostracized, orphaned and denied his legacy. All right, Ino-chan, if you want answers, find Naruto and invite him over to dinner. I can't. I've been searching everywhere for him for the past 4 weeks and I still can't find him. Oh dear. He skips out on the academy. Daddy, it'd be easier to count the number of days he's been in class than the number he's been outside of it. Oh no. And no one knows where he goes. No one questions what he's been doing with all that extra time he spends outside of class. Inoichi took a deep breath. It seemed he would be scheduling a meeting with the Hokage soon. Within interest, Tenten was a simple girl. She liked weapons, sharp objects, pointy blades, and everything in between. She enjoyed training, swordsmanship, archery, and improving her aim and control over either blunt or pointy objects which could be utilized in battle. Despite having only under a year's worth of experience as a genin, and serving underneath what could only be described as a circus act of insane teammates, she had done well for herself, and liked to believe, at the very least, that she was sane. Though her hair was frazzled and she had bangs over her eyes, and her body was tremendously sore from having her butt kicked all over the place by the taijutsu freaks in her team, and then having to handle several D-rank missions afterwards, and of course, performing team training exercises of racing around the village with one hand tied behind her back, she believed that the stress wasn't getting to her, and she still lived a simple lifestyle. Of course, getting back home and meeting her foster father still at work in the forge, crafting shinobi weapons had been one of the few relaxing things she had enjoyed. Right up until she had to join him, and though she did enjoy crafting different kinds of weapons and materials, she was far too tired to continue the activity for the meantime. Eventually, all her works had been crafted so poorly that she had no choice but to throw the metal away into the large trash bins provided for the residents of the area, seeing as how they were not even salvageable enough to be reforged into something decent. This, however, was where Tenten felt she might snap. No sooner had she tossed away the materials, did she hear the rustling of a figure moving within the night and shadows. She had first thought it was her tired mind playing tricks on her, right up until she saw, with full certainty, that there was a creep actually rummaging through the trash cans, and she felt her irritation rise. Of all the nights, she reached for her holster, drawing 3 shuriken. She of course had no intention of seriously hurting the fellow, she only meant to scare him off, a form of intimidation to make the person think twice about doing something as unethical as rummaging through another person's trash. With a flick of her hand, she sent the 3 shuriken flying, enjoying the sound they made as they whistled through the air. Only for her to blink, several seconds later, as she did not hear the sound of them hitting their target. As a matter of fact, she heard no sound at all, as though the shuriken had simply vanished in midair. I missed. No. That's not possible. She grabbed out 2 more shuriken and threw, listening as they whistled in the air. And then they vanished, never hitting their mark. Tenten's irritation turned into a nagging doubt, and she moved from her position towards the trash can, fully intent on finding the reason for the odd mishap. Only to find a blonde-haired boy, muddied and covered in dirt, grinning as he twirled 5 shuriken on his left hand, 1 for every finger, before he dumped them into a large cloth sack. Then, he began ransacking her trash once more, as though he didn't even realize that she was there. Tenten felt her eyebrows twitch. Did you just steal my shuriken? He raised his face up towards her, his eyes blinking owlishly in a perplexed manner. Huh, what are you talking about? Someone threw away 5 awesome shuriken, so I'm taking it. Tenten realized, solemnly, that she might be dealing with an idiot. Given the activities of the day, her exhaustion, and her very slowly teetering resistance to idiocy, she found herself slowly reaching her boiling point. They weren't thrown away, they were thrown at you. He blinked, his face scowling in annoyance. Why would you do that? Tenten resisted the urge to pull out her hair. Why would I do it? She pointed at him. Why are you rummaging through my trash in the middle of the night? I'm recycling. He said it as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. You don't get to recycle other people's trash. Says who? Says common sense. He scrunched his nose up in confusion and shrugged. Never heard of him. Tenten palmed her face, slowly before she took in a deep breath. Well, I'm certain he'll pay you a visit. She withdrew her summoning scroll, as several shuriken emerged between her fingers, when you're staring up at the white ceilings in the hospital. Perhaps, in hindsight, no matter the severity of the offense, it was not a wise thing to attack a poor boy scrounging through garbage. Of course Tenten wasn't going to actually harm him, she just wanted him suitably scared, or at least frightened off for him to scurry off into the night and leave her alone to her aching sores as she got the minimum amount of sleep before Guy-sensei appeared at her window by the crack of dawn. What she was not expecting, however, was for the boy to be caught so off guard by the attack. He slipped, and ended up getting himself directly in the trajectory of one of the shuriken that would have flown safely overhead. Tenten could feel her heartbeat race as she watched the shuriken race towards the boy's eyeball, and she could already see her kunoichi career come to an unfortunate end, as one mistake would lead to her killing some poor hapless kid. Then, The boy leaned forward and twisted his head. Tenten was not a completely religious person, but even she would question if Kami had been the one to interfere on her behalf as she watched the mysterious young boy headbutt a thrown shuriken with his goggles, somehow hitting it at an angle that was flat with the exact amount of force at the exact needed time. Then she watched as the ninja star ricocheted off his head and struck another one that was mid-flight, which was then sent barreling straight towards her, streaking past her cheek and leaving a cut as it whizzed by. Her jaw detached. Gee gaw, I'm so sorry. He dashed over to her instantly, and it was only then that she realized that there was a wet feeling on her cheek. Her hand gently traced over it, and she stared at the redness that stained her fingers. Goman, I didn't mean, She grabbed his hands, and the boy let out a shudder, expecting a stern reprimand. What he got instead was her staring at him with stars in her eyes. How did you do that? Her bleeding cheek was a mere scratch, and she had definitely endured worse at some of Rock Lee's kicks, so there was no need to get worried about it. What did draw her attention was the feat that she had just seen. Do what? This. How did you headbutt a thrown shuriken in midair and redirect it enough to bounce off another one? That sort of innate shurikenjutsu skill was outright insane. It took key focus and concentration to pull something like that off, and even after a year of practice, Tenten could only so much as bounce one shuriken off another enough to go in a small weak curve, whereas her goal was to learn how to endlessly ricochet them back to back, to the point she would be able to make them go in a perfect circle if need be. It's a secret. A great secret from the one and only Uzumaki Naruto. Besides, he pointed his finger accusingly at her, you threw shuriken at me. Real ones. You were trying to kill me. She grimaced. They were supposed to be warning shots, but that was wrong of me to actually throw real shuriken at you without knowing if you were a civilian or not. You could have gotten seriously hurt. She bowed her head. Gai-sensei's teachings echoing her that no matter who you were dealing with, an elder or a younger one, you had to be able to accept when you were in the wrong and own up to your own mistakes. I'm sorry. The boy seemed genuinely stunned. Then, he let out a long grin as he coughed and rubbed the back of his head. Shucks, don't worry about it. You were probably just tired from all your training. I get cranky too when I haven't really slept. He coughed again. So I guess we kinda got off on the wrong foot. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, future greatest Hokage of Konoha. His hand extended. Tenten almost wanted to laugh at the words, but then regarded the tone in which he said it. It wasn't just some open, empty statement. No, it possessed the same level of conviction that Lee had whenever he said he would beat Neji, or the same level of belief that Neji had when he said that Lee's fate was determined. It was the same factual manner that Gai-sensei said he was the greatest taijutsu specialist in Konoha, and the same manner in which she had said she would become a strong kunoichi. She smirked. Tenten, future greatest weapons mistress of Konoha. They shook, and he once more flashed another grin. You know, you're the first real genin I've met and you're pretty cool. If all genin are like this, I can't wait to get my headband too. She blinked. Once. Twice. Thrice. You're an academy student. Yeah, what did you think I was? An extraordinarily gifted street rat looking for stuff to pawn in other people's garbage. Oi, it helps that you're wearing that horrible orange jumpsuit. What kind of aspiring ninja wears orange? Oi, don't mock the orange. And what is that posture? Is that a taijutsu stance or is the ground recoiling from your advances? Oi, Tenten sighed. Alright, looks like we're going to have a lot to work on. Work on what now? Tenten cracked her knuckles. You probably don't know how you pulled off that trick with the shuriken, but I know it's not luck. I'm going to figure it out how you did it and repeat it if it's the last thing I do. Naruto blinked. What? It was early, ridiculously so, as the sun was just peeking through the horizon, and the atmosphere was still chilly and filled with morning dew. Despite this, the Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, was in his office quite earlier than most. This was because he had a meeting scheduled earlier than normal, but he would not deny that upon hearing that Yamanaka Inoichi had requested a meeting, he was expecting a more serious topic than that of Naruto. Still, he would give Inoichi the benefit of the doubt, considering the extenuating circumstances. It was not entirely the first time a clan head had approached him about the blonde. What do you know about Uzumaki Naruto? Sarutobi Hiruzen would have found this question odd, and then laughed at anyone who actually had the impetus to ask him such a question. Except, when it came from one of his most trusted shinobi, and the appointed leader of his T&I department, then it became another issue entirely. He responded what he knew about the boy, his parents, his background, and of course, the secret that was sealed into him. What do you know about Uzumaki Naruto personally? With that question came some guilt, as he had not invested much time into the boy's life and affairs, but what he did know was that the boy had a fondness for ramen, a penchant for pranks, was often loud and boisterous, and wished to become the Hokage of Konoha. What else? What else? Well, that is, the Sandaime Hokage of Konoha found his lips furrowing into a sad thin line. That was, as a matter of fact, all he did know about the boy. Hokage-sama, what if I told you that those qualities you mentioned are what everybody knows about him, and nothing else? Hiruzen's nose rumpled. What? Yesterday, Hokage-sama, I met with his Chunin Academy instructors, and before that, I met with a select few of his classmates, and likewise still before that, I met the owners of the Tsuki ramen stand. All of them, every last one, when I asked them to tell me what they knew about Uzumaki Naruto, they recounted these exact same three things. Yamanaka Inoichi raised 3 fingers. He loves ramen. 1 finger down. He likes pranking. Another finger down. He wants to become the Hokage. The Sandaime Hokage placed his hands on his desk as he gave Inoichi a stern but contemplating look. Had this been anyone else other than Yamanaka Inoichi, he would have stopped listening and waved off their concerns on accounts of blatant paranoia and some hidden bias against Naruto. However, Yamanaka Inoichi had known Namikaze Minato, and the 2 blondes had been friends and comrades, to the point in which they had sometimes worked on the same team. Even more, Inoichi had also known Uzumaki Kushina, and the man was definitely not someone who would ever have any form of bias against her son, somewhat considering the fact that just as Uchiha Makoto had supposedly possessed some childish infatuation with Minato during their academy days, so had Inoichi possessed the same with Kushina. Not that the Hokage listened to or cared about such things, as it was merely the freedom of youth. I do not see where the problem lies, Inoichi. The problem, Hokage-sama, is that we are human beings, not one-dimensional cardboard cutouts. It is impossible for one person to only have 3, and just 3 features about him that makes him memorable, to only have 3 aspects to his personality and character. Inoichi shook his head. To put this into perspective, Hokage-sama, what does Uzumaki Naruto do when he is neither pranking people, nor eating ramen, nor declaring his desire to steal your hat? Where does he go? How does he spend his time outside of classes when neither pranking nor eating? What does he do after a long and exhausting day? The answers to those 3 questions were all equally unknown, and it dawned on the Sandaime just how little he truly knew about the young boy named Naruto, who looked up to him with stars in his eyes as though he was Kami's best gift. Yet, Sandaime knew that he had failed Naruto more than he had helped him. He let out a tired sigh. His age was rapidly catching up to him, and he knew and believed that he had tried to do his best for not only the village, but also for the son of his successor. Everyone Minato knew that was capable of taking care of Naruto was not available. Hitaki Kakashi was a mess, psychologically speaking. After the loss of his teammates, he retreated into Anbu and took only the toughest of missions of the S-ranked caliber, and it was clear that he possessed some sort of death wish. He clearly could not leave the upbringing of a child to him. Jiraiya was far too busy maintaining Konoha's spy networks, or at least, so he claimed, as his job did include him traveling from place to place, drinking in bars and taverns and peeping on women in hot springs. Of course, even if he was not basically a wanderer, the Sandaime could not in good conscience leave Jiraiya all alone to raise a child. Tsunade would have been perfect, but she was now an alcoholic and gambling addict lost to her own grief, and he would not want her raising an impressionable young child either. Uchiha Makoto had once offered, but the clan politics were against such a thing, as the Uchiha clan had just been accused of the ones masterminding the Kyuubi's attack in the first place. It would be tremendously bad if one of their own had then decided to adopt the boy. The Hyuga were out of the question, and part of his village they might be, but Hiruzen had never appreciated or favored a clan that could and would so callously brand their own family members as slaves in the name of preserving and protecting a bloodline. Such a place was not where he wanted Naruto to grow up, believing that such practices were the norm. The Aburame once again offered, but it was likewise impossible as at the time, the Kyuubi's chakra and presence made their Kikaichu bugs scared and wary, and of course, there was the issue of Naruto eventually growing up to feel like an outsider, as he vastly contrasted the majority of the Aburame. The ideal clans would have either been the Nara, the Yamanaka, the Akamichi or the Inuzuka. However, there was once again the question of allowing a single clan that much power. It was not viewed as a clan attempting to train and foster the son of their hero, rather, as a clan potentially raising and shifting the loyalty of a Jinchuriki away from the village and into their own hands. And so, Naruto had grown up unloved and uncared. Hokage-sama. The aged man was drawn from his musing, and he shook his head, letting out a long sigh. I believe we should let sleeping dogs lie, Inoichi. What? If you are worried about Naruto-kun's loyalty, I can personally assure you that Naruto is loyal to Konoha without measure. I can see it in his eyes, in his movements. He would be the last person in the world to betray Konoha. But Hokage-sama, this is my final decision, Inoichi. For Kami's sakes, let the boy be. Once he graduates from the academy, then you can conduct whatever tests you wish during his psych evaluations. Yamanaka Inoichi let out a deep sigh, and Hiruzen watched as the man gave a salute. Hi, Hokage-sama. Now is there anything else you wanted to speak to me about? Nothing of any real value, Hokage-sama. Except to perhaps look into the academy instructors to find if indeed there are Chunin intentionally sabotaging student scripts. Hiruzen slowly rubbed his beard. He knew that there was always that possibility, for Chunin instructors to be visibly biased against Naruto, but he had hoped that it would be of a minuscule level of simply asking him more questions in class rather than giving him unfair grades. He could not go out and start rooting every Chunin that was biased against a single student, otherwise that would make it appear as though he was the one being biased against them. Alright, I'll have an Anbu team look into it. Anything else? No, Hokage-sama. Dismissed. The leader of the only naturally blonde-haired clan in the entirety of Konoha nodded, and utilized the Shunshin technique to leave Hiruzen's office, making the aged Hokage sigh once more as he leaned into his desk. It had only been a month since he had seen Naruto last and given him that scroll, and he had not seen or heard from the boy at all on any other occasion. He knew he was busy, and he knew that he also had to think of the lives of the other villagers and of his shinobi, but Naruto was simply that breath of fresh air that was perhaps often needed. Of course, there was also the small, disconcerting part of him that realized that what Inoichi said was somewhat true, as he knew very little about what Naruto did or where he went to in his free time. He was about to call the Anbu, but he stopped halfway before he did so, and let a small contemplative smile come on his lips instead. Rather than summon Naruto into his office, it was best to make it into a surprise. He swung on his coat and hat, placed his pipe into his mouth, and then prepared himself to move forward and once more allow the professor to grace the streets of Konoha. Perhaps had he not been so preoccupied, he would have noticed the tiny curved insect that had been perched at his window all the while. He would have seen as the bug's eyes zoomed in and out on his form, before eventually taking off into the sky, flying low through the air and free from the threat of birds before eventually landing on the hand of a certain individual. What does it say? Yamanaka Inoichi believes the Kyuubi Jinchuriki could constitute a flight risk due to how little is truly known about him. Danzo-sama must hear about this. The two figures gave each other a nod, before vanishing once more, unseen and unheard, as phantoms in dawn. Within interest, Tenten had always wanted a cute little kohai. There was the appeal to picking up a junior that she could buy sweets, pet, pamper and have him, her help her sharpen her weapons with a big loving smile. Perhaps it came with the fact that she had been the Nei-chan of the orphanage she had grown up in, not in the motherly, caregiver sense, but in the tomboyish, you mess with me, you enjoy the taste of sand, manner. Her somewhat crass manner and a slight tendency for violence had probably what had inspired her obsession with blades and weapons of all sorts, and it of course helped that she thought playing with dolls was the most ridiculous thing in the freaking world. She still remembered the first doll she had been given, considering the fact that she had given it an extensive surgical process by retrofitting the hands with sewing needles and the legs with scissors. Of course, the other girls had not appreciated the beauty of Princess Scissorhands, abbreviated to Seeheim, the scissor-handed, needle-legged princess doll. Then, she had not understood why the orphanage's matron had been so appalled. Seeheim was far more useful that way to help in cutting and sewing together what little clothes they had possessed as of then. Regardless, the weapons enthusiast wanted someone who was also equally passionate and shared a love of the sharp and pointy. Of course, this was somewhat of an idealistic wish that she would sigh and ponder, than something that she ever saw coming into fruition. Right up until the moment that she had found Uzumaki Naruto and taken him under her wing. Except, well, Uzumaki Naruto was not the cute little kohai she wanted, but quite possibly the one she needed. Come back here you. Assuming she did not kill him first. I'm sorry. Hello sorry. I'm Ten. Get ready to eat pointy metal. As it had turned out, she really wanted to find out if she had been a little bit too enthusiastic in seeing his display, and then she wondered if it was mere, simple, dumb luck that had saved her career as a kunoichi from coming to a terrible end. So of course, she had needed to confirm that hypothesis by recreating the scenario and seeing if indeed, Uzumaki Naruto could curve and redirect shuriken with a headbutt. Of course, this time around she had tossed rubber shuriken at him, because attempting to use the real ones could most possibly end in disaster. The results had been outstanding. 7 out of 10 times, Uzumaki Naruto had successfully pulled of a ricocheting magic tricks with the shuriken that were thrown at him, and 7 out of 10 was a very promising result. So then, it came her own turn to practice and see how to pull of the same tricks, and she had asked him to stand and toss the rubber shuriken and kunai at her. She had closed her eyes, took in a deep breath, and then steeled her gaze as he said he was going to launch, only to open her eyes and see a rubber chicken flying through the air. She was not kidding. A rubber chicken, with its beak out in front, and its wings spread to the sides like an eagle. She had been so stunned at the sight of the flying avian toy, she could not react when it had smacked beak first into her eye and sent her tumbling to the ground. Chicken 1, Tenten 0. Of course, Naruto's cacophonous laughter had merely added insult to the injury, which led to her current situation of her chasing the blonde around the field while her unloading the full wrath of her weaponry. Was it overkill? Maybe. But you try explaining to Maida Guy, Rock Lee and Hyuga Neji that the reason you now had a large black eye was because an academy student clocked you in the face with a rubber chicken. She grinned as she caught a hold of the fleeing blonde's legs with her kusarigama, the chain tying neatly across his left ankle, as she jerked the chain back and proceeded to quite literally reel him in as though she was a fisherwoman on a croaky old boat in the middle of a vast lake. Well, look what we've got. The catch of the day, the famous orange flopper. She grinned as she watched him futilely scrape his nails against the grass in an attempt to escape. Eventually he just stopped bothering and let himself be dragged, until he came to stop directly beside her foot, and she gave him her kindest grin. You know, I kind of feel really bad for fishes right now. She rose an eyebrow. Just for fishes? No. I mean, yes, well, you know what I mean, but I kinda also don't know what I mean. If you were any more eloquent I'd need a dictionary. He gave a sheepish grin. That black eye goes really well with your hair tt ebeo. I'm not taking fashion compliments from someone who thinks wearing a blinding orange jumpsuit in the forest is a good idea for a shinobi. She sighed as she shook her head, paying little heed to his chant about how orange was the best. The sun had barely peeked over the horizon, due to both of them arriving bright and early for the training. Dressed in her training clothes that was more or less a refitted martial arts gi, rather than her normal attire, she really shuddered when Naruto showed up, fully clad in his orange glory. That jumpsuit had got to go, staring at it was making her already aching eye ache even more. Speaking of which, how in the world did a rubber chicken have enough force to give her a black eye? For Cammy's sakes, the only thing that was capable of doing that was one of Rock Lee's punches or kicks, but of course, Lee was a gentleman at heart, and his attacks never aimed for her face. Wait, why in the world do you even have a rubber chicken in the first place? Naruto had stopped listing off the vague uses and benefits of the color orange to stop and gave her a stare. Oh yeah, that. I wanna become a trap master dadbayo. She blinked. What? Was this providence? Was the fate douche onto something when he kept insisting that there was a divine will in place for each and every being? She shook her head. Heavens forbid Neji was right. You want to become a trap master, meaning you want to become a shinobi that uses traps to fight. He gave an enthusiastic series of nods. I don't see that working out well for you at all. Huh, what do you mean? She pinched his cheek, dragging it, only to blink as she realized that the whisker marks felt like grooves in his skin, and as he gave an incoherent grumble. What I'm saying, chicken man, is that you look more like someone fit for flashy ninjutsu or taijutsu. She grinned. Though mostly ninjutsu, because you need to grow about a dozen couple of more inches to make sure your opponents don't lose sight of you in a taijutsu brawl, chibi. Oi, I'm not short, and the Hokage is a young bachelor with women vying for his attention. Naruto frowned. He opened his mouth for a second as if to say something, but then changed his mind and closed it as he grinned. I don't think Gigi would find that funny. She shrugged. His inability to see the comedic value doesn't mean it's true. Naruto gave another wide grin. Well, it was true, once upon a time. It's not like Hokage Gigi was born old. Tenten sighed. You're missing the point. Being an ensnarement specialist is something that takes time, dedication, and planning. If you want to plant a trap for your enemy, you are working on the assumption that you know where your enemy is, how he will react, and a plethora of different uncertain variables that will contribute to the success of your traps. And that is almost never the case in a battle. Ensnarement specialist. Awesome. I didn't know there was already a title for it, dadbayo. Her left eye twitched slightly. There isn't, I just made that up on the spot, and I think you're still missing the point. Huh, no, I get it. She gave him a flat look. Really now? He placed a finger on his chin. Say, I'm on a super secret mission to guard the greatest bowl of ramen in the world, but then, shinobi from the hidden village of Noodle Broth are trying to steal it. If all I've got is my traps and stuff with me, I need to know which road they'll use to try and get the ramen, how many of them they are, and whether my traps can stop them all and keep the ramen safe all at the same time. 'Cause if I don't know all of it, my traps could fail to even catch them and they'll get away with the ramen ttebao. She blinked. That's one way of explaining it. But yes, you need foreknowledge if you intend to succeed as a shinobi using traps. If you work on a team that has a hyuga, a sensor or a tracker of any sort, you'd have that aspect mostly covered, but even then, there exists the possibilities of the traps failing, or of them missing your targets altogether. Successful trapping of opponents was something she knew about because she had dabbled a bit on it earlier, utilizing things such as bear traps and paper bomb mines. Even with Neji's Byakugan telling her where the opponents were coming from in order for them to plant down her traps, it had still not done much good. Their opponent had attempted to flank them, missing her traps completely and going all the way around to attack them from behind. Any attempt she had made to lure them towards the traps had only succeeded, until they realized they were traps there, and then proceeded to avoid it like the plague, making most of her work pointless. Sensors and ninjutsu experts were also the bane of all trap setting, because your opponents either sense the traps miles away or simply barrel through it with ninjutsu. So, what do you think I should do? She turned her gaze back to the boy, his two brilliant blue orbs looking bright and eager as he playfully tossed a rubber chicken in his hands. Me. Well, yeah, you're the expert. He rubbed the back of his head. Should I still try and be an, ensnarement specialist? Or, well, should I, Tenten scratched her head as she glanced around the area. It was strange for someone to come for her for advice on specializations, as Lee had never done it, Neji would never do it, and Guy did not need to do it. Still, she stared around her team's training ground as she contemplated a way to make Naruto's goals of utilizing traps become more effective. Training ground 9 was nothing special. There was a small pond, numerous trees, and a kicking post that had been abused to hell and back by the furious feet of Lee. The training grounds were somewhat large, as expected from Konoha, and it was filled with the luscious green trees and a thick forest covering. She turned her attention to the several bull's-eyes and stationary targets that she had also abused to hell and back by puncturing them with as many shuriken and kunai as she could. All of them hit the center though, now having extraordinary aim, although it had not always been the case, and once upon a time she couldn't even toss a rolled-up paper ball into a basket 3 feet in front of her. Hello, Tenten, you still in there? Her attention rapidly turned back to the blonde, gazing at her up with eager eyes. She wanted to tell him that he was still an academy student, and he should not be bothering so much about any of this now, considering his Jonin sensei could just come up one day and kick all of his hard work to the curb. She likewise wanted to tell him that utilizing traps was not in his best interests, considering how he seemed to be a walking ball of chakra, and he would excel at becoming a ninjutsu tank. She wanted to shake her head and contemplate what in the world she was doing, spending her Saturday morning off tutoring someone. This was one of the only 2 days when she was usually free from Guy, his eccentric mini-me and the fate douche. What had spurred her to come out so early, and start training to learn how to deflect shuriken with a headbutt? It sounded like something Lee and Guy would do when they were fired up and did not think about the larger picture. Tenten, you never really wanted to be a weapon specialist, did you? Naruto's voice had drew her from her thoughts, and she turned back to the blonde, whose eyes were the same blue, but rather than sparkle, they seemed to have a curious depth to them, like someone had dipped their hands into water and caused continuous wavy ripples. Then her mind interpreted the words and identified their semantic meaning together as sound around her started to slowly go mute. Well, she had never wanted to become a weapons specialist, even though she did like the sharp pointy objects. No, her true dream was to become like her role model, like Senju Tsunade, one of the Densetsu no Sanin, and the world's greatest and foremost medical practitioner. She had wanted to become a medic, a healer, someone who would aid her companions on the battlefield when they were wounded, someone who would ease and comfort bruises and pain. There were 1,000 people who could kill and there were a dozen kunoichi who only knew how to seduce, but there were very few individuals who could heal and restore, because that was a truly difficult task. One that had been too difficult for her, so it had seemed. Dreams were fragile, and reality came crashing upon the realization that she did not have the chakra control to become a medic. There was no hopes of her ever saving life in a profession that demanded all she did was to take it. So in the end, her dream tarnished, realization that her lifelong idol was a person she could never work to become, she had thrown herself into weapons instead. She did love and care for weapons, she really did, but there was always the nagging reminder at the back of her mind that the only reason she was a weapons specialist in the first place was because she had failed her original dream. Her goal of becoming a weapons master was just a cheap substitute. Still, no one should have known this, or at least, remembered it. Not her sensei, not her teammates, and not even her adoptive father. She gave him a steady gaze. Why do you ask? What do you mean? No one has asked me that before. Ever. She would remember easily if there had been anyone that had brought it up, but there was none. Questions she had gotten instead was about how she got so good at weapons and why she seemed to love them so much, but not one person had looked upon her and asked, "You didn't really want to do this, did you?" It was like looking at a pro fisherman, smiling with a giant shark in his hands, and then telling him that he never wished to be a fisherman and then somehow being correct. What could possibly even draw that conclusion? Well, I noticed that. He looked as though he was going to continue, before shaking his head. Never mind. It's not important. Her lips pursed. Not important. No, there was not a chance in hell that she was going to take that. Oh no, you don't. If you've got something to say, you'd better say it. He seemed doubly reluctant and it made her more annoyed. What was he hiding? Was he secretly some kind of stalker that had been following or was obsessed with her? It seemed unlikely for that to even be the case because she was certain she was a good enough kunoichi to have noticed someone wearing bright orange with bright blonde hair stalking her. So what? You just looked at me and it came to you just like that. That's not possible. What tipped it off? Well, he rubbed his chin, his eyes still giving that strange depth. It's kinda in the way you throw. She rose an eyebrow. In the way I throw. What kind of vague ridiculous statement was that? How did the way she threw her kunai and weapons indicate anything of the sort? That was like saying that you could tell a husband was cheating because he always hoarded family funds, or a woman was a murderer because she cut meat at ungodly speeds. She grabbed him softly by the collar and gave him the nicest smile she could muster. Naru-chan, would you kindly mind explaining what that means? Gah. That's the only way I can explain it, Dadbeo. A pair of scissors was rapidly in her hands, summoned easily from her scroll in a puff of smoke, and her smile was becoming strained further and further as the seconds ticked by, and Naruto's face still looked reluctant. Try harder, or the orange jumpsuit gets it. Wait. Hey now, there's no reason for the jumpsuit. She gave him the look. The one she had first given Neji when he thought he could get away with talking down to her the same way he talked down to Lee. The one she got whenever someone insulted or called her one-dimensional for her choice in relying only on weapons, and the one that had usually sent tall bullies twice her size reeling back before her fists and even began to shatter their noses. There was no mirth in her eyes at this point. I don't mind getting a black eye because of hijinks, but what I do mind is when someone who literally met me yesterday can give me the googly eyes, and then suddenly come to conclusions about things that not even my own teammates and Jonin-sensei realized. So either you start talking, or I start snipping. His reluctance seemed to remain strong as his face squirmed in a myriad of expressions, right until the snipping of the scissors took off a large portion of the orange jumpsuit. Alright, you throw like Sasuke Tem. She blinked, the scissors coming to a stop in her hands. The name was infamous at this point, and you would be hard-pressed to find anyone who did not know Uchiha Sasuke, sole survivor of the Uchiha massacre. Explain. Now, he groaned. When you throw, you don't really give off that super awesome vibe of you saying, I can do this even though you really can. You give off that vibe saying, I have to do this. And what's the difference? Uzumaki Naruto gave her a shrug, his shoulders raising and dropping in rapid succession, and his depth-filled blue eyes hit her brown straight on. I can become the Hokage, but I don't have to become the Hokage. Not a word was uttered as she gazed into his eyes, and then eventually detached her grip from his collar, as she snapped the scissors close with a flick of her wrist. I think we're done here. Oi, what's that supposed to mean? What do you mean we're done? She dusted off her training attire as she gave the annoyingly perceptive blonde a final look. She wasn't even sure if the blonde understood the insinuations of his own statement, or perhaps he did, and maybe he was pretending not to. Hey, Tenten, where are you going Ibeo? The clearing was left with only a blonde boy within it, slowly scratching his head. Was it what I said? But she's the one who wanted me to say it. So why'd she get angry Ibeo? He proceeded to irritably scratch his head. Gah. First Sakura-chan, then Ino, And now Tenten, I don't get girls at all.